Hi everybody, Steve Tarter, another edition of Tartar Sauce. And with me today from Bradley University, Mr. Ed Lamoureux, who's Communications and Interactive Media school up there.
Two departments.
Two different departments. And well, of course, we've talked over the years, Ed, about privacy on the internet. The issues, of course, the internet's become the be-all and end-all of everything now. But you have written books about it. Obviously, you teach students that are coming up out into the world. You're concerned about this issue.
Yeah, at the base, for me, democracy doesn't work very well without privacy.
We forget that.
We're seeing how it works, without much privacy, and there are some troubles. So some of it, I think, is pegged to that, and folks don't take privacy, if you will, very seriously.
Right.
So it's tough to teach about it, tough to talk about it. But it is, I think, still a real important issue. There are probably different ways to talk about it. And that's what we're going to do today, is kind of take a little different tact on this notion of privacy.
You've brought up a fascinating concept, because I was not aware of it until you brought it up. But could you tell us a little bit about the professor there from originally from Harvard?
So we talk a little bit about a book that Shoshana Zuboff of Harvard, emeritus faculty at Harvard in the business school, has written, called Surveillance Capitalism. And she worked on it for 10 years, and it's really, really good. It's long. It's about a 400-page book, and filled with lots of jargon. But my sense of it is, I've read maybe, I don't know, in the last 15 years, probably 100 books on this issue, on privacy and the internet, new media and digital stuff. And this one, I think, not everybody agrees, but most of the critics agree that she's really nailed it. She understands what is behind it, how it works, how it started, the mess we're in, and such. So I kind of look at it, and the problem is I can't hand it to people, because it's
right.
like this.
Well, and we can't talk about it in a 5-minute, 20-minute thing. Yeah. But when you sort of steered me towards it, and you sent me an article and all that, and obviously we're not talking about the entire work. The fascinating thing is, she looks at it from the standpoint of, you got to pull back a little bit and look at what's the terrain.
Well,
here.
There are some really easy concepts. This first notion is something she calls behavioral surplus. A better term maybe is digital exhaust. She also uses that term. So I'm going to use a simple example, even though we don't send them as much as we used to. When you send an email, there's the content, and there's the headers. And generally speaking, if you said to somebody, so what do you want to be private? They would say the content. I don't want anybody to read my email.
Right.
They forget about the headers. The headers are digital exhaust. They're behavioral surplus. And they tell a lot about you, where you are, who you're sending it to, what time of day, etc. Right? And then very much deeper than, if you think about it, every level deeper, there's machines. There are machines in the process, a router, and then the telephone lines, and then the switching stations. All of that, then, in order to send that email, has digital exhaust. There's more data connected to that. And what Amazon and Facebook and the folks in the Silicon Valley figured out is that behavioral surplus has an enormous economic value. That's the information that goes into what we call the data marketplace, that then marketers and other folks can use to do things to you or with you, right? And we don't think at all about digital exhaust. We're just thinking about the content, right? So when we think about privacy, we think, oh, don't get into my email.
Right.
But if somebody says to you, well, it's just the headers, oh, okay, we don't care about that. The digital exhaust is the stuff that has all the value.
But now, were they examining that from the beginning, or did a bell go off and they say, hey,
it was a developing process, and after Google got into the picture, it became much, much more used.
Data mining.
Yeah, we think of it in the internet as the cookie. Kind of started it on the internet, but it really was there all along. Anytime you send electronic messages, you've got these other pieces of information. The problem now is that there's no such thing as anonymous. Even if they don't collect your identity, when they collect the data, all of that information still allows companies in the digital marketplace to re-identify stuff. There's just so much data. So then the second notion that she has is this notion of, she calls it rendition. You think about rendition in the terms of getting a terrorist and putting him in jail someplace he doesn't want to go and he doesn't want to be. Do you want to give up all that information? Did you ever have a choice? No, it's rendition. They just take it. In fact, if you look at the terms of service. It's part of what they say is theirs, and you can withdraw on our platform, and you don't have you have no right to this information, et cetera. They wouldn't even tell you what they take. And what she notes is that, you know, that we never gave, and nobody ever gave them permission. They just started to say, this is ours, and we're going to extract it. We're going to make use of it in whatever way we want to. And then the third kind of concept that she offers a lot more, but the big ones that I can talk about in a short period of time are kind of traditional prediction and control. So what all of that information comes to is predicting what we might be doing, and then, of course, providing sometimes, you know, benefits for doing it in a certain way, like a discount. So if you have a smartphone and you walk past a store and you've been looking at stuff on the web, you might get an offer for an ad as you go by the store.
Right.
That's a pretty, you know, high level. So you go to get a car loan, or you go to get a house loan, a home loan, and you're offered a certain interest rate. What's at that rate? And if it was a quarter point higher, would you go over here rather than over there? So with all of that information, I can begin to nudge you a little bit, which is a form of control. So the kind of the problem at the bottom of it is we think of, you know, Big Brother watching and it's more little brother. You know, it's more mini-me, you know. It's not, you wouldn't notice any of it, right? But you don't know why you're being encouraged to use this rather than that. Why the number says you don't get the loan rather than you do. So you can write to the credit agencies, 3 of them, the big 3, once a year and get a credit report free. You can't get in a report on your data. Financial, you can get report on all the data that gets collected, who it's sold to, who sells it to somebody else, who uses it to make decisions. You can't get any of that information.
Now, is Europe different than the U.S.
Yeah,
in monitoring
the
this?
GDPR, which is the law that the European Union passed last year and went into effect, gives people more rights with regard to this and puts more pressure on the big American tech companies. So, for instance, Europeans have so you couldn't change anything if you don't know what they're doing. So you have a right first to request a data report. And for instance,
we don't have that here.
Well, you can ask all you want. You have the right to make the
You have
request.
the right to ask.
That's right. And Google will tell you, well, we have a dashboard, and go use it. But it doesn't.
What is that?
In Google, there's software, if you will, a button you can push, and a series of forms you can fill out that you will get some information about the data that they have collected from you. So, for example, they'll give you most of your search history, for example. But there's a whole bunch of other data that they've collected that you can't get from them.
They won't.
In Europe, they have to produce the report on request, the entire report. So it would be just like a credit report here, it's a data report there. And it comes in, you know.
Why wouldn't we want that here?
I mean, you want the...
Sure. You deal with this on a daily basis.
You want the Marxist answer?
Well, you know, whatever answer you want.
The basic answer is we tend to protect business,
right,
and not people. They tend to protect people over business. That's kind of the. I mean, there are different ways to cut that.
Right,
but they tend to be well. You know, they had that experience of not only the Nazis but the Russians spying on everybody. You know, and so they're very still sensitive about being watched. And so when Google, especially, and then later Facebook, really started doing the watching, they start paying attention. And the other thing is, you know, they've got the EU, even though they don't agree about everything, they've got this very broad collective governmental organization. So if the Spaniards see something they really don't like, they've got a place to go. Well, then they've got leverage because they've got the European Union, as opposed to just, you know, our big market, which does have some leverage. But we tend to protect businesses like as though they were people, as opposed to protecting individuals. You know, we could say good or bad things about the individuals themselves, about Americans and Europeans, and I don't know Europeans enough to say. Americans tend toward liking entertainment, and they like things frictionless. And this new media is made to be that way. It's made to be very entertaining and frictionless. It's easy. It's fun, it's fast, you know. Right. Well, you don't want to have to slow it down with a lot of asking people for permission all the time. You'd rather have them look at that terms of service button and privacy button, go right past it, say, oh yeah, okay,
so
click.
The American consumer would opt for the present system. In other words,
Well, we are opting for the present
right.
system.
In other words, we don't really care about this privacy.
Apparently. And that's kind of a problem. And what I've said, she doesn't. This isn't in Zuboff's book.
Yeah.
But what my perspective is that we can't fix this without all three of the sides taking some action. Consumers have to take some action,
Right.
because government and industry does no motive to respond.
Right.
If it continues to look like Americans don't care at all.
Mm-hmm.
And after the Snowden report, it appears to be, or incident, it appears to be we don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Government could step in and begin to take some action, but you don't want the government to take it over because they're spying on us too. Right?
Right.
They're part of the surveillance environment. They get more information now from the private sector than they do from their own intelligence officers.
Wow.
Way more,
Right.
because they have access to the data marketplace. Way more access than even the commercial operations do. And obviously the companies have to take some action.
And they're not going to know it
Well,
prods them.
if there's no impetus, so somebody's got to move a little bit. So we're seeing a little bit of movement on the part of government and a little bit of move on the part of the industry. Not much move on the part of people yet. And you don't know quite how it's going to go. I just read a new book by Tim Wu called The Trouble with Bigness. I forget what the exact title is, but and his argument is that it's largely an antitrust problem. Is that in America we've sort of dropped antitrust
Right. Everything
altogether.
verges. Yeah.
We don't legislate against it anymore. We don't prosecute it anymore. We've just given up antitrust. If you go back to the 1900s, we had the same kinds of problems we had now. Huge corporations taking over the whole country. And 20 years of social foment over it. But what ended up was Roosevelt, the first one. Teddy came in and broke them up. And then subsequent presidents did right through the 50s, almost into the 60s. You got a big operation like AT&T or Standard Oil or the coal company or the steel company or railroad, break it up. You telling me Facebook isn't a monopoly? Google?
Yeah.
Amazon? But we don't. So
move on it.
if in Europe they do antitrust movement all the time, fines, you wouldn't, huge. So if we were to move a little bit in that direction, I've said, if you would just hold the data marketplace to the same reporting standards that you do the credit marketplace. So the big three have to make those reports to you. We have no similar law on them. So you don't know where all the data is. You don't know who's buying and selling your stuff.
If people knew more, would they react, do you think?
I don't know.
I mean,
honestly, I do not know. Right now, I guess as a pessimist, I would say, boy, if we didn't react to Snowden, I'm not sure we would react to more. But on the other hand, you say, I know they're not going to react if they don't know. So I suspect, I suspect that if people really realized how much there is, but not so much how much there is, as how much influence it can have and what kinds of things it can influence. Because we really, as post-TV Americans, right, we've really been programmed to think it's just the ads. And I don't care about the ads. I ignore those.
Right.
It's creepy when they track me on the web, but I can still ignore them. See, we just think it's the ads.
Right.
We forget it's also the intelligence and law enforcement infrastructure. We forget it's also the nudges that we get that we didn't know anything about when we're doing commercial stuff. And if we knew about all of that, I think maybe we might start to say, I'm not so sure. Now, and we've talked about this a number of times. Are all the Americans going to stop using their smartphones? No. When I'm going to my grave, you can take it out of my hands.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Bury it with me.
But there might be. So I'll give you an example that I think everybody can connect with. I don't care that Netflix knows my movie habits. Don't care at all. They make recommendations. I don't care that Amazon knows my shopping preferences. I shop on Amazon when I do. I don't care that they know what I buy and they make recommendations. What I care about is then they sell that information to others that I don't know anything about. They then let all of that go out into the marketplace. So we probably could reconstruct it in such a way that you could still do a lot of the things that you do, probably with the same frictionless amount of lack of effort, if you will. It would be as easy and fast. But the companies would actually protect that data rather than using it as another revenue stream. There's an enormous revenue stream for this stuff, and we're not getting any of it. They do.
What's the reaction you get from your students when you
after they've before or after they wake up?
Because we should mention, Ed, you've taught classes for several decades at Bradley. You've seen the whole internet thing come to this huge
co-founded the multimedia program.
Co-founded the multimedia program. And now you're dealing with kids that have never known anything but the internet.
Right.
So what's their reaction?
So I teach a privacy class. And when as I'm teaching the privacy class, I have maybe 12 students, 13 students. And throughout the class, 9 of them are really interested. 1 or 2 of them are always totally opposed. I want to do it this way. I use the fingerprint because I use the retina because it's what I want to do, and I can talk to them till I'm blue in the face all semester long, and I'm not making any progress. The other 9, boy, they're interested. Oh, I didn't know that. No matter what, and the minute they hit the door, out comes the smartphone, whop, 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 and they're on Instagram and Facebook, and it all just washes away. So. And I don't think they're any different. And anytime anybody complains about what young people do, children or teenagers or college students, I say the same thing to them. Look at their parents. Don't complain about your kid being addicted to video games because you haven't put that thing down since we've gotten here. You know, and so it isn't just the young people.
Right.
It's across the society, and we have. I mean, look, I'll be real critical, and I don't mean this to insult people, but we have been like sheep, paying no attention at all.
And because, like sheep, we've been led. Managed very well.
They're really good at it.
Yeah.
These are really smart men and women who've spent the last 20 years getting really good at it. And they've been informed by the intellectual community at Stanford and MIT and the other high-end places about psychology and everything around it, design, everything you can, and it's very, to say professionally done would be quite an understatement. So, you know, the purpose is, and that, you know, listen, you were in the news business. That's how media works, isn't it? You don't. The newspaper isn't just to inform people, it's to get people to look at the things so they see the ads.
Sure.
Television was made so that people would come back, and in fact, I used to go on tours at the studios when I lived in Los Angeles, and they would tell you when you go to do the tour, the first thing they'd say is, we're there to fill up the space so you'll watch the ads. Otherwise, it would be black and you wouldn't watch the ads. They know it. That's the way it works. Websites were always made to be sticky, right? So you'd come back to that website. So it's always been this way. But yet the addiction culture has been a little stronger in the last few years. They're getting better at it.
We're just winding down, Ed, and this is a fascinating topic. We've got to have you come back, and we'll go through another phase of it. Should we be concerned?
Absolutely.
Because,
if you want this kind of democracy, we're going to have to start paying attention, because the only people who live under this kind of surveillance are people in prison and old people who can't take care of themselves and have to be watched, and infants who have to be watched all the time. And that's not what the majority of folks are. You can't have this kind of democracy with this kind of, you know, if the wrong folks get in charge of it,
could be bad.
It could be really bad, because they have access to tools. They can turn off your car, turn off your power at home. Things that you don't want to have happen.
Right. Well, Ed, we're out of time. Fascinating. Ed Lamoureux from Bradley University, communications and interactive media. Stay on the job, Ed. We need you. We got to have this word getting out there. Glad you come back. Thanks again, folks. See you later.
PeoriaLife.com